Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast, India at G7 Summit. It is day 3, the final day of the Kananaskis Summit. Kananaskis is a resort area in Alberta province of Canada. Canada is hosting the G7 Summit this time around. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been invited there to speak at an outreach session. We are standing by for a family photograph with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and of course other G7 leaders and other invited leaders as well. And we are also getting updates on certain bilateral meetings which we believe have already started. We'll bring you more updates on that, especially from ground. But we continue to have two guests with us. Professor Bava is with us and at this point in time, and also Ambassador Mukul. Ambassador Mukul, on the India-Canada bilateral, we know that this is one confirmed bilateral that will surely take place. So, again, we know that the ties were stuck because of the issue that Justin Trudeau had brought up with India when he came here for the G20 summit. He spoke about it in Parliament as well, and India strongly refuted all those allegations. But now it seems that the ground is being laid to normalize the diplomatic relationship. Like you've been saying, we expect that the diplomatic strength of both the countries would be back in full strength, or would be restored to some extent. But if you look at the other aspects of cooperation between India and Canada, it seems that there's quite a lot of potential there, isn't it? Because if you look at the bilateral trade, then in both goods and services, there is the balance of trade is in Canada's favor, not so much in India's favor. And there were trade talks that were happening at some point in time. Do you think that they can resume now?
No, I think it is important to recall that it was soon after the election of Prime Minister Carney, Prime Minister Modi had called him to congratulate him, and thereafter the foreign ministers of the two countries have also spoken, and now Prime Minister Carney has extended this invitation to our Prime Minister to be a part of the G7 outreach. I think all this augurs well. As I said, it is moving. It seems to be moving in the right direction in terms of restoring. We have had traditionally very good relations with Canada across a very large gamut. It has been quite a multifarious relationship before this problem, owing to the domestic politics in Canada, arose during the time of Prime Minister Trudeau. Now, it remains, of course, to be seen how Prime Minister Carney is going to navigate that domestic problem that he has. Because if you will recall, even in terms of extending the invitation, he had been criticized by some section of the Canadian population, including threats of protests, etc. So, but it is that is for Prime Minister Carney to handle. I think he has done well so far in terms of overcoming those hurdles or those domestic challenges in terms of starting with this first meeting at the Prime Minister's level, albeit on the sidelines of a G7 outreach summit. But I think the ice has been broken, and I think the bilateral meeting should set the agenda going forward. And you rightly pointed out that there is a tremendous scope in terms of trade, economic cooperation, investments. I had earlier pointed out about the people-to-people contacts, the large number of persons of Indian origins, or what we call the PIOs resident in Canada, the potential in the field of education, Indian students there, possibility of Canadian universities opening campuses here, and so on and so forth. So that is an old relationship, and I am sure that the bilateral meeting will result in some positive outcomes. Of course, how much and how far, that remains to be seen. But I think for starters, we may have the High Commissioners restored in the two capitals, and also perhaps in due course the High Commissions augmented in terms of their diplomatic personnel to reach the levels at which they were before things went downhill in the last year or so. So yes, I think that that appears to be one of the most substantive outcomes, if I can say, of could be one of the most substantive outcomes of Prime Minister Modi's visit to this summit, in case we are able to get the Indo-Canadian relationship back on track.
Right, Professor Bava, if we can zoom in and talk about the specifics of the transatlantic dissonance, as Ambassador Mukul puts it, or transatlantic rift, as others call it. We've seen Macron, in a sense, set the stage, as it were, by first traveling to Greenland and announcing, along with the Danish Prime Minister, that Greenland is not for sale, not to be taken. And then he also makes a comment about a possible ceasefire between Israel and Iran that prompted Trump to leave the venue in a hurry. And we saw what happened afterwards, Trump criticizing Macron. In a sense, do you see, again, I come back to the original point, submission I'm making, that the European unity, is it coming in the way of Trump's policies or stance on a number of crises, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict? He wants Russia back in the G7 or G8. He wants to bring in China as well. We've seen European leaders holding a critical position on the Israel issue, the Gaza issue, UK, for instance, sanctioning Israeli ministers. What do you make of the European position as such on a number of crises confronting the world at large?
So Ambassador Mukul spoke about the transatlantic rift. You can also talk about how the West sees a dissonance today. I think it's important to recognize that politically the West on both sides of the Atlantic perhaps have their worldviews not overlapping in precisely the way it was, say, 40 to 50 years back. Is that something of a reason for a shock? I think it also is reflective of how much the engagements and priorities on both sides of the Atlantic have also been growing and changing. And I think it also shows that different leaderships have different abilities to take along the two sides of the Atlantic. One has assumed for a long time that the both sides are always in sync, always participating. There have been other historical occasions where the transatlantic relation has experienced turbulence. This is not the first time, and they have come out of the turbulence to reset the relationship. Perhaps I think what we are witnessing, in terms of a historical shift is also that the kind of political opinions on both sides have, grown and changed, reflecting also in part different domestic consensus. I think domestic politics has become an important part of it. And
Professor Bava, do you think this is a temporary phenomenon, or will it have a long-lasting impact on world affairs going forward?
I think at the security level, I think that a point of inflection has come in European security. Europe is investing, Germany more recently 5% on European defense. So I think that point of inflection has come.
Okay.
There is definitely, a fork in the road as far as this bilateral transatlantic relationship has come. But you will have to then look at it in measured terms. They're trying to negotiate, as von der Leyen said, a free trade agreement, trade agreement with the US, to bypass the tariff wall which America has put forward. So you're going to see hard negotiations taking place, which was not expected between the classically what we thought was two sides of a bridge which strongly held the bridge together. I think that definitely is seeing a new kind of a political headwinds in which very strong negotiations are going to be part of the game.
Right. And there are updates coming in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reached Kananaskis. He's also met the President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, and these are live visuals that we are getting from Kananaskis in Canada. A handshake between the chair of G7, this time around the 51st G7 summit, Mark Carney, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 6th consecutive participation as an invitee leader for the outreach session of G7 shows the importance that India commands on the world stage strategically, diplomatically, politically, geopolitically, economically, and so on.
Indeed, so there we saw the first visuals of PM Modi's arrival at the venue of the summit. Remember, India is among the 10 invitees attending the summit, of which 7 of them are in attendance. 3 of them have chosen to skip the summit, but all in all, it's a pivotal moment in global affairs, and we are waiting to hear from the Prime Minister for a working session over lunch later in the day from the venue of the summit. We still have with us our guests, Ambassador Mukul and Professor Bava. Ambassador Mukul, just to give our viewers a sense of what to expect in the next several hours as the summit progresses. From your vantage, what would be some of the outcomes that you would be expecting to materialize towards the end of those deliberations there?
The summit or in terms of the bilaterals?
From the summit, yeah, and the bilaterals, of course.
Yeah. No, I think, see, with regard to the summit, the outreach leaders normally make their statements and have a discussion, but the documents in terms of the G7 would already have been set out. Because there is no joint communique, there will be the chair's summary and there will be the standalone statements on various issues to paper over the kind of differences that we are seeing. So in terms of that, but I think still the outreach leaders, including Prime Minister Modi's statement, will be heard given his standing and stature and given the heft that India brings to the table. Not just by the leaders there, but across the world, because as I said, Prime Minister Modi does not articulate only with regard to India, though officially he speaks for India, but also puts across a large number of concerns of the global south. So that would be something that would be important. In terms of the bilaterals, I just heard you say that he has had a meeting with the Mexican president, if I got it right.
Right.
Yes.
There are other bilaterals, of course, certainly with the host country, Canada. Canada, we have been discussing, and we have already said that this could be one of the major positive outcomes of Prime Minister's attendance at the summit, visit to the summit, in terms of setting the Indo-Canadian relations, resetting Indo-Canadian relations or bringing them back on track. With regard to the other countries, each of them is very important, both whether they are members of the G7 or some of the outreach members, like Mexico is one of the outreach countries. And I said this is important because I do not remember whether the Prime Minister has met the President of Mexico earlier. Perhaps this is his first meeting with President Claudia. This is, of course, subject to correction, with President Claudia Sheinbaum. And I think it is important because, as I was pointing out, even before the G20 came into its own in 2008, the 5 countries that were part of the Heiligendamm-L'Aquila process as an outreach to the G8 at that time were India, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and China. So, I mean, that 8+5 grouping was important right since the turn of this century. And I think it's important that India and Mexico, though we may be far apart in different hemispheres of the globe, as it were, but I think there is a lot of cultural linkages. Also, it goes back to the Maya culture historically, in terms of the Maya culture remains that have been found in Mexico, which have very close linkages with our own Indus Valley civilization, etc. But later, but in terms of the present, I think India and Mexico are 2 important players, both important voices of the EMDCs, the emerging and developing countries, and members of the global south. So I think that would be an important meeting also.
We're standing by for the family photograph of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and other invited leaders with the 7 leaders of the G7. Of course, Donald Trump, US President, has already left the summit venue. So he may not be there in the family photo for all you know, but we'll have to wait for that one. Let's take the issue of AI energy nexus, artificial intelligence energy nexus and quantum related issues. If we look at the MEA readout carefully ahead of Prime Minister's departure, it refers to this as one of the issues that Prime Minister would be touching upon. So I will make this an open question and any of you can take the question because it's slightly technical in nature. It's no secret that the use of AI is increasing worldwide, but that comes at a cost that not many of us are thinking about: energy consumption and CO2 emissions. Because each ChatGPT query consumes nearly 10 times as much electricity as a Google search and produces approximately 4.3 grams of CO2. And some experts believe that if the present day computers are replaced by quantum computers, then the energy consumption by use of AI would drastically come down. Is that really the case? And two, how do you make such technology available on a wider scale? India has proved that through UPI, for instance, and that was a major talking point also during the G20 presidency of India. But here there is another challenge of which there is a solution, so to say, but will it be widely available? What's the truth behind it? Any of you could take this up, please.
I would, let me comment not on the technical part, but on the point of technology, access and inclusion. I think India has shown with DPI that, inclusion of people is a game changer, and that how it can transform not only the economy, but it transforms the economic lives of people in terms of access to market, livelihood, opportunity, and more importantly, how it also, pushes for innovation. Recently in the AI summit also in France, Prime Minister Modi pointed out that inclusion is going to be extremely important. Having said that, I think technology, who is creating the technology, who are the drivers of technology, where is data getting created and stored, are going to become important points which are going to come onto the table in terms of how AI, quantum computing, and energy are going to get linked up in terms of also reaching the country's emission targets. So I think these are very important. The conversations are still open. Like I said, I am not a technical expert on these to get onto that particular point. But I think from a political dimension, I think it's important to see that how these conversations are going to be framed. India's contribution in this is going to be phenomenal in terms of what it will bring. And I think that is where some of these conversations on the sideline at the bilateral level will also be extremely important. Ambassador Mukul, over to you.
Yes, Ambassador Mukul, would you like to weigh in on this, please?
Yeah, just to add, I would like to again say that this is a theme which the Prime Minister has been regularly articulating, including at the Puglia summit, G7 summit last year. And apart from the negative, positive, the inclusive part, I think the Prime Minister of Canada in his priorities has put AI and quantum both in terms of fostering economic growth. Now, I think the idea is to leverage AI to the extent it can help in terms of taking economic growth forward. The other issue that India has been championing has been the partnership with regard to AI. There are no rules, as we know, as we speak, in terms of global rules, that is governing the use of AI, including its positive, negative, etc. aspects, and also some of the technical aspects that you had raised, that about the in terms of
energy consumption,
impact in terms of the energy equation. So these are the things, exactly these are the things that India has been championing with regard to having a partnership or a kind of a global set of norms to be formulated, which can regulate and guide countries in terms of the use of AI going forward.
Right, Professor Baba, one of the only things, concrete things to have emerged from the summit so far is the G7 statement on the Iran situation. Now, would you like to comment on this issue? For instance, we've heard the European nations and the G7 also now clearly spelling out their stance, saying that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But the question remains, does Iran want to have a nuclear weapon? Number one. And number two, Israel says Iran is only weeks or months away from acquiring a bomb, but the US intelligence reports suggest otherwise, saying it's still some years away. So what's the truth?
I think the truth is between these two very different bookends, actually, unless the evidence is placed in front of the international body which can verify claims. I think a lot will be open to speculation. And one has to read the claims and counterclaims in the context of the geopolitics of the region. The statement from the G7, I think, is reflective of their collective thinking on how they want to frame the question over there. For those who are reading that statement, I think it has the potential to leave, again, a lot of space open to think that there is a certain pre-decided position which is there by a group of countries which have been meeting periodically, let's not forget, for the last 50 years. And at the same time, as a member of the United Nations, Iran would also have to, navigate difficult political terrains. The question is, what are Iran's own obligations under the NPT?
Professor, since you referred to the NPT, may I quickly come in and paraphrase the Iranian statement for the benefit of our viewers watching this broadcast? If I can go back to the Iranian embassy statement put out a few hours ago, it says that it is hypocritical that while Israel is a de facto nuclear weapon power, the world is accusing an NPT signatory such as Iran of threatening global security. So, do you see a dissonance in the global discourse on nuclear issue?
And also, if I may add here, the Iranian parliament was in the process of taking Iran out of the NPT.
Right. Basically under international law, if you're a signatory to any treaty, then you're obliged to stand by those obligations in very simple terms. So if a state is not a signatory, it can't be held treaty bound. So to that extent, it is up to Iran, to see where its obligations rest and how does it present an evidence that it is violative or not violative of it. As far as NPT is concerned, it is a regime which, has decided at a given point in time who gets to have nuclear technology and capability and who cannot. And therefore, it creates the most important, what I would call as a nuclear hierarchy, as who is in and who is out. And that hierarchy is maintained at all costs. That is the reason which India has pointed out right from the beginning. The right of a state to develop is an inalienable right. You can't take it away. But politics around the issue of nuclear technology and nuclear science and knowledge has been something which has meant that it has created a group which has, and then if you look at the countries which have the weapons are also the countries at this point who are also the permanent 5 in the UN Security Council. So there are multiple ways of looking at what this has produced, and the issue of where Iran stands and what is happening has to be read in the larger geopolitical context of where the lines of support and divisions are drawn, who is standing with whom in that part of the world. So I think it's not a very simple issue of just a question of the nuclear technology and the enrichment process, which has also been discussed, that there was major efforts, to have the JCPOA in which the European countries, the EU, the Big Three, and the US took part, and what came out of it. So I think what we are also witnessing at this point is an important point for us to look at the number of conflicts which are now mushrooming, and what does all of that mean in the context of what originally the G7 was founded for, which is, global economic relations, how to put the stability back and increase. So the more volatility we're going to see global economy take a hit. And if the global economy takes a hit, then every economy is going to, be paying a price for that. The speculation on oil, for example, has already started going up. Markets have more or less kind of adjusted a little bit, but it's a wait and watch to see what happens in the next couple of days. So, that kind of speculation is going to be harmful for any kind of economic growth around the world. The last thing you need is the speculation of this kind on whether the entire region is going to go up into a war. Are the lines of war so clearly divided? Or will this get contained as soon as possible? So the nuclear is part of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. It's a larger, much more deeper geopolitical question.
And if I can quickly follow it up with Ambassador Mukul, since we are referring to the Iran-Israel hostilities, Ambassador Mukul, what do you think is the stance of Russia and China on this particular issue?
I think at the moment, of course, first priority of everybody has been to look after their citizens. And because of the bombing that has been going on, and the statement coming out of China was that asking, like many other countries, asking their citizens, etc., to take care and the like. But coming back to this issue of the nuclear, I mean, the point is that, yes, the Iranian embassy has clearly pointed out that Iran is a member of the NPT, and there is no clear indication that it is in violation of NPT yet. I mean, the attack by Israel on Iran has taken place on the presumption that there has been a violation, while there is no clear evidence of it. So that per se is what the embassy has put out is, I think, a valid proposition. Now, the fear is that so far there are IAEA, as part of the NPT regime, there are the IAEA, International Agency for the one in Vienna, which monitors this, IAEA inspectors in Iran monitoring that the Iranians are in compliance with the NPT. Now, the fear is, as I said, that in due course, or maybe immediately, or in due course, Iran may opt out of the NPT, ask these inspectors to go out and drive its nuclear program underground. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. But certainly, I mean, the question would arise that while it is meeting its obligations, if it is still being attacked by countries, then what is the point of being part of the NPT? As was mentioned, it had earlier also signed the JCPOA, which was not only accepted by the major powers, which was negotiated with the major powers, but also accepted by the international community. And Trump, in his 1.0 avatar, appended it, completely, abrogated it. So the question now is, what does Iran do? And that, again, only time will say. But I think G7 pronouncing against Iran, to my mind, doesn't carry much credibility, because they are all openly backing Israel in this particular context.
Professor Bava, coming to you, earlier Ambassador was speaking about whether this is the first meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Shenbon of Mexico. It indeed is, because MEA spokesperson Randeep Jaiswal has just tweeted photographs from the bilateral meeting, and it says that this was the first meeting between the two leaders, and both sides discussed avenues to further deepen bilateral ties and cooperation in trade, pharmaceuticals, science and technology, digital innovation, and shared perspectives on key global and regional issues, including priorities of the global south. So we know that Mexico also very actively participated under India's G20 presidency in the various meetings in New Delhi. And we know that Claudia Sheinbaum is not the usual leader, because under her we've seen Mexico becoming the first country in the world to have judicial elections at the national level, local level. On June 1, those elections were held. And then Sheinbaum also arguably is the only head of state in the world to have a very, very wide and very, very credible climate science background. So in this context, when the MEA writes about they're discussing the priorities of the global south, How do you put that into perspective for us?
I mean, first of all, of course, what you've highlighted is Mexico's own internal transformation, which is extremely important. As a large country bordering the United States, it has also been in news for lots of different issues. But more importantly, I think the fact that India expands its diplomatic engagement is also reflective of two things. One, India's not just, I would say, growing economic power and potential, but also to recognize that, India has for long, when we think back to the Bandung summit, has always tried to bridge the world, the North and the South, and therefore, reconnecting and expanding partnerships, the political partnership, the new avenues for economic and science and technology and innovation, as you have listed, what has been put out by the MEA, all signals to an upgradation in a relationship with a country with which, we share many of the common challenges, which as countries in the global South would do. So I think one sees a remarkable move in that sense. And it also, I think, showcases how India is expanding its engagement. These are countries, the fact that the Prime Minister is visiting, has visited Cyprus, now will also visit Croatia on the way back, also tells you about how Indian foreign policy is expanding its outreach and bringing a new understanding, which is done through the level of the Prime Minister interacting with these leaders. So I think that is a remarkable way in which India is expanding its outreach to engage countries which we normally would have not thought, number one. And second, of course, the transformation in these own countries, which also makes it important for us to see that we become part of new bilateral journeys and, importantly, multilateral understandings and engagement in the multilateral forum.
Right. What Professor Bava refers to gives me a perfect segue to my next question to you, Ambassador Mukul. If we were to focus on the Indian foreign policy, especially in the last decade or so, we've seen India straddle inherently contradictory groupings, be they global or multilateral or regional. For instance, we have G7 as opposed to the BRICS, for instance. India is member of both G7 and BRICS. It is also member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We've also seen India's, having a multi-vector policy, as it were, to countries in West Asia, be it the Israel-Palestinian divide or the Israel-Iran issue, or even the other issues confronting the world at large. So has Indian foreign policy shown finesse, diplomatic finesse, and is becoming nimble by the day?
No, I think it is absolutely correct what you point out, that it goes back to our original idea of non-alignment and thereafter the strategic autonomy concept, wherein we have been able, in fact, we are one of the only countries which has been able to, as you put it, straddle different groupings across ideological divides. You could take any examples. Of course, we have the G7 and the Western group on one side, and we have the BRICS and SCO. But also, if you recall, on the sidelines of the summit in Japan, when India was the only country many years ago, in the last 10 years, of course, where India was the only country which had these two trilaterals which were commented upon. One was the JAI, the Japan, America, India, and the other was the RIC, Russia, India, and China. I mean, on the sidelines of the same summit happening in Japan. So, I mean, this has been part of our diplomatic achievement. Again, if you look at it in the Gulf, we have had excellent relations with the Arabs on the one hand, and with Iran when they had a lot of difficulties before the rapprochement happened between them. Similarly, with regard to to Israel and the Palestinians, we have been able to have relations with both of them. Even within the GCC, when there was a divide between Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain on one side and Qatar on the other, we continued to have excellent relations. Our energy supplies, our oil and gas supplies continued to flow. Our diaspora continued to flourish in each of these GCC countries. So yes, you're absolutely right. We have been able to span these divides across, and that I think has been part of our foreign policy, and more specifically diplomatic profile pronounced under Prime Minister Modi's 10 or 11 years at the helm, when we have been able to reach out and not get. In fact, Russia-Ukraine is the other big example, when most thought that we had initially criticized India for not criticizing Russia or condemning Russia. But now most people see that in retrospect, that the advantage that we could bring to the table by reaching out to both the leaders of Russia and Ukraine. So yes, you are absolutely right. It is one of the achievements of Indian diplomacy and foreign policy, and I think that is the way it will be going forward. That now we are speaking today to the leaders of the G7, along with, of course, the outreach members of the Global South, and soon you may see that we are part of some other event where we are closely talking to the Russians or the Chinese or whoever else. So yes, this is part of India's foreign policy and diplomacy.
Right. Ambassador Mukul, Professor Bawa, do continue to stay with us. Let's pull up some more news from the G7 summit in the meantime. PM Modi has met President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, on the sidelines of the 51st G7 summit in Kananaskis. This was the first meeting between the two leaders, and both sides discussed avenues to further deepen cooperation in trade, pharmaceuticals, S&T, digital innovation, and shared perspectives on key global and regional issues, including priorities of the Global South.
So that's an ex-post that has been put out by the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, Randhir Jaiswal. So photographs coming in of a bilateral meeting that Prime Minister has had with the President of Mexico on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada. It's their first meeting, because you would remember that when India was hosting the G20 summit, Claudia Sheinbaum was not the President of Mexico then. We'll take a breather at this point in time, but do stay tuned to our special broadcast, G7 2025 Kananaskis Summit, India at G7 Summit.
Geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says. Supply creates its own demand. Between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the economic brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India.
Can the US launch a bombing campaign against Iran? The Philippines vessel suffered structural damage. The saga of child sexual abuse is the United States China's debt trap strategy. Truth is stranger than fiction. Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast, India at a G7 summit, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is very much there at the summit venue at Kananaskis, a resort area in Alberta province of Canada. This is the 51st G7 summit. All the G7 leaders were there, but Donald Trump did leave early, and the invited leaders are also there, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is of course there, and there was a handshake between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Prime Minister of the host country, Canada, Mark Carney, as a welcome bid for the Prime Minister, welcome gesture. And now there are fresh reports coming in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has tweeted a photograph of of a pull-aside meeting that happened between him and the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, at the G7 summit. He's also put out another photograph of him meeting PM Albanese of Australia. He writes, "Good to meet my friend PM Albanese of Australia during the G7 summit in Canada." So at least two more pull-asides have happened, and one bilateral meeting is what we can confirm at this point in time. We continue to be joined by two guests. Ambassador is there, and also Professor Bava. Ambassador Mukul and Professor Bava continue to be with us. So these are photographs that we are flashing from the X feed of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So coming to the pull-aside that the Prime Minister had with the President of South Africa, Ambassador, we were earlier talking about how there were during the Italy G7 summit, there were a number of countries that were called from the African continent, but this time around Canada has chosen to call only South Africa from the African continent. And you're also looking at the photo of Prime Minister Albanese of Australia. Reminds one of the possibility of a Quad summit also on the sidelines, though Donald Trump has already left. How do you see this pull-aside that the Prime Minister had with both the leaders?
No, as I had earlier pointed out, I mean, the importance of these summits is not just the summit per se, but also the opportunity for various meetings, structured, pull-asides, informal, etc. I think both these pull-aside meetings are absolutely important. President Ramaphosa from South Africa, which holds the G20 presidency at the moment, while it is of course true that he's the only African representative invited by the Canadians, but be that as it may, the importance of President Ramaphosa's presence there, and the fact that he will be hosting the next G20 summit later this year is also very important. So it's only appropriate that PM has had a pull aside with him, given the pressure of time and engagements. Similarly, with regard to Australia, with the Prime Minister Albanese, now again there is a lot of talk about India hosting a Quad summit later this year, and therefore Australia is in that context also, apart from of course our bilaterals with both these countries. Australia is also very important in terms of the Quad dynamics, and therefore I think this pull aside is also important. As I had said, I mean, these are short, brief meetings, greetings, not very detailed, but I think they serve a purpose in terms of connecting with the leader at the leadership level. And also, I'm sure Prime Minister would have extended or mentioned the fact that he hopes to see, if the Quad summit happens, he hopes to see Prime Minister Albanese in India later this year. And similarly, I'm sure President Ramaphosa would have told Prime Minister or invited him for the G20 summit, which will happen in South Africa again later this year.
Right, Professor Bava, talking about pull-asides and bilaterals, another bilateral that's on the PM's itinerary is his meeting with the German Chancellor. Under Friedrich Merz, can we expect Germany to stay the course, or should we expect some radical departures from the hitherto German policies on issues such as Russia-Ukraine conflict for that matter?
So I think the bilateral with Germany is extremely important. In fact, I'm just back from Germany after having spent a 3-month research stay over there, and I can tell you firsthand that in the the coalition agreement between the forming of the government, India is mentioned 3 times in the agreement. Pretty unusual when you think about it. But in the larger context, if you put that along with the last German government putting out its India strategy, I think it augurs well and is indicative that as India and Germany head into the 25 years of a strategic partnership, there is definitely a scaling up and re-envisioning of the partnership which is taking place. So I think in terms of this meeting, as Ambassador Mukul also pointed out, in this case, it's the first meeting between a new German Chancellor in Germany who's come into office more recently and the Prime Minister, and it builds on the existing partnerships that one has. And at the same time, it is about opening up more opportunities. Remember that this meeting will also be read in tandem with the India-EU, what is happening, although there may not be a pull aside on that happening. But it reinforces the fact that India and EU are at this point negotiating a free trade agreement. And the Prime Minister is also on record to say that we have to get the free trade agreement completed by the end of the year. So a very strong political statement. And I think this bilateral meeting with Germany is indicative not only of the India-German part of it on the one side, but the India-Europe part of that meeting, which aims to strengthen the 2 sides of the equation.
Yes, so we've discussed so far the priorities of the G7 presidency of Canada and how India would be the voice of the global south. We'll thank you, Ambassador Mukul, as well as Professor Bawa, for joining us with your views on this special broadcast. But we'll continue to tell you all that is happening at the G7 summit in Canada, including all the developments that take place with regard to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's presence and engagements there. But for now, we'll take your leave in this special broadcast, India at G7 summit.
Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Namaskar.